only. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this rule and in support of the underlying legislation. Last night, the Rules Committee met and produced a rule providing for consideration of 3 pieces of legislation: H.R. 2240, H.R. 2243, and H.R. 2255. Will all be considered under a closed rule, each with 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking member of the Committee on the Judiciary or their respective designees. Additionally, the rule provides each with a motion to recommit. Republicans are here in Washington this week to continue to work on behalf of the American people. This is, in fact, Police Week, but we have been busy this year, this Congress, delivering for the American people. So far this Congress, we have passed legislation to secure our elections. H.R. 22, the SAVE Act. Hold rogue activist judges accountable. H.R. 1526. Bring transparency to institutes of higher education. H.R. 1048. Make changes to our border with the Lake and Riley Act and the Halt Fentanyl Act, and to repeal the Biden-era harmful environmental regulations by passing what we call Congressional Review Acts to undo the damage of the Biden administration. As Republicans continue to work on behalf of the American people and finalize the reconciliation products we are working on currently, we are also here to recognize National Police Week and the thousands of law enforcement officers who wake up every day to step on that thin blue line to defend and protect us. In 1962, President John F. Kennedy signed a proclamation which designated May 15th as Peace Officer Memorial Day and the week in which that date falls as Police Week. Yesterday, my staff and I got the opportunity to welcome police officers from New Braunfels, Texas, and hear about the challenges they face every day. I talk to the men and women of blue virtually every day in the district that I represent, as I know many of my colleagues do. My grandfather was the chief of police of a small West Texas town called Sweetwater. I was blessed to work in the United States Attorney's Office and Office of the Attorney General of the state of Texas, working every day with law enforcement. And what they do matters for the peace and security of our country. Our republic depends on having security on our streets. There are thousands of stories that I could share about the daily heroism of law enforcement officers across the country. Hundreds I could share even in the district I represent. Officer Dalton Schrader and Jason Wright on February 16, 2024, Austin Police Department officers Dalton Schrader and Jason Wright responded to 4-year-old William Martinez Romero, who was choking. The officers quickly jumped into action. Body cam footage shows Officer Schrader run to his cruiser to grab an anti-choking device he had bought with his own money to be prepared for situations just like this, while Officer Wright started supporting William with back blows. They saved his life that day. We must also remember that Police Week honors fallen peace officers, including one officer who died in the line of duty. Austin Police Department Senior Officer Ore Pastore died in action November 11, 2023, responding to a domestic violence call in South Austin. Hostages were held inside a home, and when officers attempted to enter, gunfire started to go off. The SWAT team was called in to help distract the suspect, one being Officer Pastore, who was trying to rescue the victims. I know I speak for many of my colleagues when I say we couldn't be more excited to welcome tens of thousands of law enforcement officers from around the country to D.C. this week.
On this vote, the yeas are 216 and the nays are 203. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The House will be in order. Just asking. The House will be in order. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on House Administration be discharged from further consideration of H-Con Res 33, a bill directing the architect of the Capitol to install at a permanent location on the western front of the United States Capitol building an honorific plaque listing the names of all of the officers of the United States Capitol Police, the Metropolitan Police Department of the District of Columbia, and other federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies and protective entities who responded to the violence that occurred at the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021, and ask for its immediate consideration of the House.
Under guidelines consistently issued by the successive speakers as recorded in Section 956 of the House Rules and Manual, the chair is constrained not to entertain the request unless it has been cleared by the bipartisan floor and committee's leaderships.
Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
The gentleman will state his inquiry.
This is Police Week pursuant to Public Law 87-726, enacted on October 1st of 1962. Police Week here in the United States Congress, where Congress honors the courage, the bravery, the service, the sacrifice, and the heroism of members of law enforcement. Is that correct?
Okay. The gentleman's not stating a proper parliamentary inquiry.
Further parliamentary inquiry?
The gentleman will state his inquiry.
Do the House rules require compliance with the 2022 Public Law 117-103, signed by the President at the time, that requires a plaque listing the name of all police officers who defended the Capitol on January 6 to be placed on the western front of the Capitol building? Do the House rules require compliance with that public law?
The chair will not respond to an inquiry regarding the general application of the rules of the House to a matter not currently pending before the House.
All right, further parliamentary inquiry?
The gentleman will state his inquiry.
We appear to be in violation of the House rules, given that the law that was passed in 2022 required that a plaque honoring those heroic police officers be placed on the western front of the Capitol building no later than March 15th, 2023. But 791 days have passed, and this Republican Congress has refused to comply with the law. It's time to honor those heroic officers. It's unconscionable, it's unpatriotic, it's unfathomable, it's unacceptable, and it's un-American.
The chair will not provide
to honor those officers and treat them with the dignity and respect that they deserve.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair will not provide an advisory opinion. Thank you.
The script says Ohio, but it's Kansas.
So we're going to go into suspensions.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Schmidt, seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 405, I call up the bill H.R. 2243 and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 58, H.R. 2243, a bill to amend Title 18 United States Code to improve the Law Enforcement Officer Safety Act and provisions relating to the carrying of concealed weapons by law enforcement officers and for other purposes.
Pursuant to House Resolution 405, the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on the Judiciary, printed in the bill, is adopted, and the bill as amended is considered read. The bill as amended shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary or their respective designees. The gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Schmidt, and the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, each will control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Schmidt.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and to insert extraneous material on H.R. 2243.
Without objection.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. H.R. 2243, the Law Enforcement Officer Safety Reform Act, which reforms LEOSA, makes important updates to the existing LEOSA program. In 2004, President George W. Bush signed LEOSA into law. The law exempts certain active and retired law enforcement officers from local and state prohibitions on the carrying of concealed firearms. In order to qualify under LEOSA, active law enforcement officers must meet several important requirements. For example, they must be authorized to carry a firearm by their agency. They cannot be subject to disciplinary actions by the agency that could result in a loss of their police power. They must meet certain firearms qualification standards. They cannot be under the influence of alcohol or other intoxicating substances, and they must not be prohibited by federal law from possessing a firearm. Retired law enforcement officers must also meet several requirements in order to qualify under LEOSA. For example, they must have separated from service in good standing and served as a law enforcement officer for an aggregate of 10 years or more. They also are required to meet certain firearms training standards and must not be prohibited by federal law from possessing a firearm. The LEOSA Reform Act will allow these officers to carry a concealed firearm in the same manner many licensed citizens carry a firearm in their state. For example, the LEOSA Reform Act will allow law enforcement officers qualified under LEOSA to carry concealed firearms in national parks, certain federal facilities that are not open to the public, on public transportation, in school zones, and in other areas. The bill also reduces the frequency that qualified retired law enforcement officers are required to meet certain qualification standards. Many states allow state-licensed concealed carry permit holders to carry a concealed firearm in gun-free school zones and on public transportation in the state in which they are licensed. This bill affords qualified law enforcement officers the same privilege. This legislation improves public safety as our officers face increasingly greater dangers, and current restrictions hinder their ability to carry firearms and protect themselves and others. At a time when violent crime continues to plague our nation, we must support our active and retired law enforcement officers and ensure they are able to protect themselves and to protect others, no matter where they are in the United States. This legislation is supported by the Association of State Criminal Investigative Agencies, the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, the Major Cities Chiefs Association, the Major County Sheriffs of America, the National Association of Police Organizations, the National Narcotics Officers Association Coalition, the National Sheriffs Association, and the Sergeants Benevolent Association, NYPD. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Kansas reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I will yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you kindly. This is Police Week in colloquial terms, Law Enforcement Week. And traditionally we do two things in Law Enforcement Week. One, we recognize the valor and the sacrifice and the commitment of the police officers who serve our communities, who serve us in Congress, and who serve across the country. And two, we try to think of ways that we actually can assist them in doing their jobs better, so we can make their work more effective and safer, and we can make the police function generally more efficacious for the American people. And unfortunately, with this bill, we're not doing either. And in fact, the majority is really falling down on the job in terms of both of those major objectives. In 2022, on March 15th, we passed H.R. 2471 to post in the Capitol, on the west side of the Capitol, a plaque in honor of the hundreds of police officers who nobly served us on January 6, 2021, when our institution, when our democracy came under attack by Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, and other violent extremists who stormed the Capitol, drove members of the House of Representatives out of our chamber, drove members of the Senate out of their chamber, and attempted to overthrow a presidential election. Now, the new administration has seen fit to pardon more than 1,500 rioters and violent insurrectionists who attempted to overthrow our constitutional form of government on that day. And they succeeded in bloodying, wounding, injuring, hospitalizing more than 140 police officers on January the 6th. And several officers died in the subsequent weeks, and several people died on that day. Now, we passed a law, not a recommendation, not an idle promise, not a suggestion in a suggestion box. We passed a law to post this plaque in the U.S. Capitol. And yet Speaker Johnson has done absolutely nothing to post this plaque. And I know that some of my colleagues think that they are being most effective when they're doing nothing. This is a Congress that's getting the reputation for being perhaps the greatest do-nothing Congress in the history of the United States. But here's one thing that this Congress can do, which is to post this plaque, which reads, "On behalf of a grateful Congress, this plaque honors the extraordinary individuals who bravely protected and defended this symbol of democracy on January 6, 2021. Their heroism will never be forgotten." What an extraordinary irony that is. Their heroism is already being forgotten, or at least there's some people who would like us to forget their heroism. Well, that's on the symbolic front, because everybody wants to pay lip service to the police. Everybody wants to say we honor them. Well, let's really honor them. Let's put up a permanent plaque for future generations of Americans to see that these officers risked their lives for the people in this chamber, for the members of the House and the Senate, for the leadership of the House and the Senate, for the staff who work here, for the reporters who are here. We have many officers who have had to leave the police service because they've been wounded and disfigured permanently by the injuries they suffered at the hands of these people. This is the very least we can do at a time when the President of the United States is saying he wants to create a fund for January 6th. Not a fund for Michael Fanone, who had a heart attack and had to beg for his life. Not a fund for Sergeant Gunnell, who was forced out of the force because of permanent injuries and now is living on a fraction of the salary he had before, trying to support his family. Not a fund for Officer Hodges, who was tortured in the eyes of the world, who got caught in the doorway while the insurrectionists beat him with all of their weapons that they brought that day. No, it's not a fund for them that President Trump is suggesting. He wants a fund for the rioters. He wants a fund for the families of the insurrectionists. And as Sergeant Gunnell said recently, it seems like he believes that the rioters and insurrectionists were the ones defending the Capitol on that day. Let's get this plaque up. We voted for it on an overwhelming bipartisan basis, and I appeal to Speaker Johnson to enforce the law. Even if you don't like it anymore, even if you change your mind about the plaque, this is the law. Let's get it up there. Now, secondly, we should be talking about how we can actually aid and abet and assist law enforcement officers in their work. And unfortunately, we have not had from the majority a single bill that they're willing to bring to the floor to increase any funding for local law enforcement. On the contrary, the emissaries from DOJ, and here I don't necessarily hold my colleagues accountable for this because they didn't seem to know about it any more than we did, but the functionaries of DOJ slashed more than $500 million that the Department of Justice was giving to local police departments across the country and community safety groups and organizations assisting victims of rape and sexual assault. And as far as we can tell, one person in DOJ, one unelected midnight bureaucrat whose career was made with Elon Musk, who seems to have skipped town now, that guy cut out hundreds of millions of dollars of aid to local law enforcement and community safety groups across America. And I introduced an amendment in the budget reconciliation process in the Judiciary Committee to restore all of that money. Not a single member, neither a Democrat nor a Republican, spoke against it. And my Republican colleagues did not say a word, but they all voted against it. They voted to uphold that nasty handiwork of DOJ, slashing hundreds of millions of dollars, which we appropriated on a bipartisan basis in the House, in the Senate, signed by the President, programmed by the Department of Justice, and awarded to their communities. My community, your communities, communities across the country, and one young person, a midnight computer hacker from DOJ, Elon Musk's emissary, destroyed all of it, more than 300 grants. And now they come forward with a budget for next year that would cut more than $1 billion out of law enforcement. FBI, Department of Justice, ATF, you name it, right down the line. I'll have some more to say about that after. So what do we have? Well, I rise in opposition to this bill. In 2004, Congress passed LEOSA, a law that allows both off-duty and retired officers to carry concealed firearms irrespective of state law. It compelled all states to allow off-duty and retired officers to carry concealed firearms under the terms set by Congress, overriding the rules of the state. Now, when Congress debated it 20 years ago, members of the committee of the Judiciary Committee on both sides of the aisle expressed anxiety about the bill trespassing on the rights of the states to decide on gun laws for themselves. The Republican chairman of the Judiciary Committee at the time, Congressman Sensenbrenner, opposed LEOSA for the reason of federalism and state rights. He voted against it. Several police groups opposed the legislation, expressing concerns about how it would affect officer safety, how it would create confusion in the event of an active shooter, how it might expose their agencies to more liability, and the insufficiency of training requirements for retired officers. Despite all that, LEOSA became the law after Congress legislated some important limits on it and imposed common sense training requirements on the former officers. Those have been in place for more than 20 years. But now H.R. 2243 would terminate the realm of discretion that states have to limit when and where individuals may carry their concealed firearms under LEOSA. It would force states to allow off-duty and retired officers to carry concealed firearms onto all private property open to the public, including restaurants, bars, parks, national parks, and playgrounds. It would also force states to allow off-duty and retired officers to carry concealed firearms on buses, trains, and subways. It would even force states to allow for the concealed carry of firearms in gun-free school zones. It also allows the off-duty and retired officers to completely disregard state laws prohibiting high-capacity magazines. This legislation thus not only supersedes the considered policy judgments of the states, but it threatens the safety and security of federal agencies by forcing them to allow concealed carry in many federal buildings. Forcing federal offices and buildings to allow concealed carry is a completely unnecessary and dangerous risk. The legislation also weakens training standards. Under current law, a person carrying a firearm must meet state training requirements every year. But this bill would allow individuals to do concealed carry with training certifications obtained every 3 years. This is troubling given that the bill extends nationwide concealed carry to retired officers who are no longer receiving the training that accompanies their old employment. Now, our colleagues have different reasons that they advance for this, which I think are pretty refutable. But in the big picture, this bill does nothing for existing police officers right now. It does nothing to enhance public safety. And our friends have completely missed the mark, I think, in terms of what Law Enforcement Week should be all about. I'll reserve.
The gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from Kansas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, a law enforcement officer does not cease being a law enforcement officer merely because he's off duty or because of where he goes or she goes. And upon retirement, the scars of service, including the animosities built up with many people who do not care for law enforcement officers because they have been subject to the enforcement of the law over the course of a career. Upon retirement, those old animosities often linger. So those of us who support this measure and support it strongly understand and argue that it is essential to the safety of our existing officers and to the safety of our retired officers that we recognize that ongoing risk and burden that they have taken on and that they continue to carry, and allow them to continue to carry the means to defend themselves and others in reasonable locations, as in many states, ordinary civilian concealed carry permit holders may do. So we think it's common sense legislation. And I would just point out in response to some of the comments of my colleague from Maryland, I wasn't here in 2004 during the debates that he cited over the original LEOSA. I have no reason to doubt the accuracy of what he said. But I would say this: it is now 20 years later, and I think that history has shown us that many of the concerns presented in 2004 were not, in fact, realized by LEOSA's enactment, nor will they be realized as a result of enactment of this strengthening of that underlying statute for our officers. And with that, I reserve.
The gentleman reserved. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate my distinguished colleague's suggestion that I may have the wisdom of somebody who's been here for 21 years, but actually I wasn't here either then. I got it just from the books myself. I was here, I should say, in 2021 when the chamber was stormed, and that is a day I'll never forget. So forgive my passion on the point of getting that plaque up. I wish our colleagues would just help us convince the Speaker of the House this is something that's simple and it should be done. And it's not a partisan issue. On that day, we were not Democrats or Republicans. We were Americans, and we were legislators together being hounded and chased out of this chamber by people who did not accept the constitutional rules of the game. And to me, it's a matter of great regret and melancholy that somehow it's become politicized to the point where people can't even acknowledge what they were saying at the time. We had Republican leaders who were describing it as terrorism and saying it was absolutely inexcusable and indefensible. And now, all of a sudden, we have the majority which will not even follow the law by posting a plaque in honor of the officers who gave blood and sweat and tears on that day. One of them, Officer Hodges, who got caught in the doorway, and the whole world saw him screaming to high heaven for probably, I don't know if it was 45 seconds or maybe it was up to 90 seconds as he was being beaten and pummeled and he was being crushed in the doorway. And when they finally dislodged him, they took him back where they were taking the officers. And you know, we were very shorthanded. And they wanted to tell him to just stay there. And wash his eyes out. Well, he took about 5 to 10 minutes. They were pouring water in his eyes, and he got up, and you know what he did? He went back outside and he rejoined the battle because he said he knew that they needed him, and we were outmanned, and we were outflanked by the forces of violence that came down on us on that day. That's the kind of bravery that we should be at least acknowledging, if not praising. I know at the time we thanked them for saving our lives, and people did die that day. And again, there were more than 140 officers who were wounded and brutalized and injured, and many still have the physical injuries and scars that they're dealing with, as well as the mental scars, because there's a lot of post-traumatic stress syndrome. Or several of the officers who were there had been in the Iraq War, and they'd been in the Afghan War, and they testified before the January 6th Select Committee that several of them testified they had never seen violence as brutal and as bloody as what took place on January 6, 2021, with the various extremist groups that came and led the attack on the chamber and then gave bloody instructions to the rest of the mob about how to treat police officers in their effort to go and hang Mike Pence. That was the chant I can still hear in my mind ringing off of the walls of the Capitol. Hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence. And where's Nancy? Where's Nancy? So we're not going to allow this to be buried into some kind of Orwellian memory hole. We've got a law requiring that plaque go up, and we're going to see that plaque goes up and that the law is enforced. As for the LEOSA reform, again, it doesn't even purport to do anything for police and law enforcement today. It would increase increase some of the mobility of retired officers, off-duty officers to go to places like restaurants and bars and public parks and national parks and metros and buses and so on with their police. I think that should be decided by our communities, whether people are doing concealed carry there. I thought that a belief in federalism was something that unifies us. That's something that the state governments can decide in cooperation with the local governments, and the Congress of the United States does not need to be making decisions about, restaurants in Charleston, South Carolina, or bars in El Paso, Texas, or what have you. Why don't we let the people of the states and the localities make those decisions? I reserve.
The gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from Kansas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, seeing no other speakers on our side, we're prepared to close.
The gentleman reserves.
And we are prepared to close. We've got no more speakers either. And I want to thank my colleague for his excellent presentation of the bill. I wish it were one that we could be together on, but I think it just goes way too far in terms of trespassing on states' rights and states' powers. We have a nice equilibrium and stasis in terms of where the law has been for the last 2 decades, and this seems unnecessary, and it does seem to me like a diversion from the things we actually could be doing to be making the lives of police officers safer. The reason why so many police organizations are with 90% of the American people in supporting a universal violent criminal background check is because nobody should be accessing guns, any kind of gun, if they're not able to pass the Brady background check. And that background check has saved countless lives since it was instituted. And the reason the vast majority of the people support it is because we need to close those loopholes. You should not be able to skip a background check by finding a gun online. You should not be able to skip a background check by going to a private gun show or engaging in a so-called private sale or transfer. We need universal violent criminal background check. That will do far more than anything we're looking at today to make the lives of police officers better, to make their jobs easier, because they are on the front lines of these killing fields across the country. America's rates of gun violence are completely out of control when compared to the nations in the European Union or Canada, our next door neighbor. We are losing 5, 10, or 20 times the number of people that the residents of those countries are losing because our gun laws are like Swiss cheese. They're filled with holes. Let's close those loopholes. It doesn't diminish anybody's Second Amendment rights. Justice Scalia has said it himself in Heller versus District of Columbia. You can have criminal background checks to make sure that only the right people are getting guns and not the wrong people are getting guns. There are things we can do to improve public safety and to assist police officers, and we should be working on those. And with that, I'm happy to yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Kansas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the distinguished ranking member for his argument and advocacy today. And I would just point out to the body that while my distinguished colleague speaks with his usual passion on many subjects, the only subject before us today is whether or not this body is going to pass to enact to approve H.R. 2243, the LEOSA Reform Act. That is the sole question in front of us. That measure is critically important to the safety of many law enforcement officers retired, to many law enforcement officers off duty. The bad guys, don't stop looking for them just because a cop's out of uniform and at a restaurant, or taking his family to a national park, or otherwise visiting a location where today the law may preclude him or her from carrying the means of defending himself, his family, his colleagues, or the stranger standing next to him. We trust those officers to do exactly that while they are on duty and in service, and we should trust them to do exactly that under the reasonably expanded scope contemplated by this bill. And with that, I would urge all of our colleagues in both sides of the aisle to vote in favor of this bill and to send it to the Senate. And with nothing further, Mr. Speaker, I would yield back.
All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 405, the previous question is ordered on the bill as amended. The question is on the engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to amend Title 18 United States Code to improve the Law Enforcement Officer Safety Act and provisions relating to the carrying of concealed weapons by law enforcement officers and for other purposes.
The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The bill is passed.
Cut it.
Versus the gentleman from Maryland rise.
To request the ayes and the nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the Chair will postpone further proceedings today on motions to suspend the rules on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered, or votes objected to under Clause 6 of Rule 20. The House will resume proceedings on postponed questions at a later time. For what purpose is the gentleman from Kansas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass House Resolution 352.
The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Resolution 352, resolution calling on elected officials and civil society leaders to counter anti-Semitism and educate the public on the contributions of the Jewish American community.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Schmidt, and the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Kansas.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and to insert extraneous material on House Resolution 352.
Without objection.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This month, we celebrate Jewish American Heritage Month. First proclaimed by President George W. Bush and by each president since, this month recognizes the contributions of the Jewish community to our country. We celebrate this month amidst a persistent increase in anti-Semitism in our country. Since the October 7, 2023 attacks by Hamas on Israel, incidents of anti-Semitic attacks and harassment have skyrocketed. The American Jewish Committee found that 77% of American Jews say they feel less safe in the United States since the October 7th attacks. Hillel International found that 83% of Jewish college students have experienced or witnessed some form of anti-Semitism since the October 7th attacks. In April, Harvard released a report examining anti-Semitism on its campus with stark findings. One Israeli student said, quote, "My friend has been told that others would not attend social gatherings if I were present, as they couldn't risk the social consequences of being seen with an Israeli," unquote. Another student said, quote, "I am tired of fighting. It's the same group of students whose sole objective seems to be to harass and intimidate Jewish students. Despite reaching out to every office, everyone says it's not their problem," unquote. Mr. Speaker, this is unacceptable. It is all of our problem, and it cannot continue. This House, elected officials at the state and local level, faith leaders, community leaders, and university administrators all have an obligation to confront anti-Semitism. I urge my colleagues to support this resolution, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to yield 5 minutes to my distinguished colleague from Florida, Ms. Wasserman-Schultz.
Gentlelady from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman from Maryland for yielding and for his stalwart and unyielding support for the Jewish community, for his leadership as a member of the Jewish community, and for his decades of work to support Jewish community values. And I rise in strong support of my resolution, HRES 352, to recognize Jewish American Heritage Month and highlight the enduring contributions of Jewish Americans to our country. I proudly sponsored this bill when I was a freshman member of Congress, and it was the first piece of legislation that I passed as a freshman 20 years ago. And I want to thank my co-leads, Representative Troy Carter, Congresswoman Miller Meeks, Congressman Fitzpatrick, for joining me in co-leading this resolution. It is a resolution that highlights the enduring contributions of Jewish Americans to our country. Every May, we come together to celebrate Jewish American Heritage Month, also known as JAM, and the generations of Jewish Americans who were integral parts of the rich mosaic of people and the heritages that make up these great United States. While we joyfully celebrate this month, it's the second JAM that we commemorate under the shadow of Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel. This was the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust. And since that fateful day, the United States has witnessed a historic rise in anti-Semitism, which was already explosive prior to October 7th, with an absolute explosion of online hate. In 2024, the ADL tracked 9,354 anti-Semitic incidents across America. That marked a 344% increase over the past 5 years, and it was the highest number on record since these instances of hate were first tracked in 1979. It is so disheartening that every year a new record is set of anti-Jewish incidents, but it also demonstrates that we have a lot of work to do together. According to the American Jewish Committee, in 2024, 1/3 of American Jews had been the personal target of anti-Semitism over the past year. And sadly, 1/3 of Jewish college students felt uncomfortable or unsafe on campus due to their Jewish identity. While we must take steps to protect Jewish students on college campuses, we cannot allow anti-Semitism to be used as a vehicle to take away the rights of others. Make no mistake, anti-Semitism is a canary in the coal mine, and attacks on Jewish students in any school setting is unacceptable, and then there should be serious consequences. By investing in policies that protect Jewish students, like fully funding the Education Department's Office of Civil Rights, to fund investigations and hold colleges and universities and, quite frankly, schools across the country in secondary schools, tolerating anti-Semitism accountable, we can support all students' ability to live and study in places that value and respect their heritage. While there is no simple solution to end this extremist hate, we all can take steps to end this violence. In the Biden administration's national strategy to counter anti-Semitism, the U.S.'s first ever blueprint, it called on all aspects of society to commemorate JAM and use it as a tool to fight hate. That's because we need Jews and non-Jews alike to learn about all the remarkable Jewish Americans who served in government, the military, or who won Nobel Prizes, for example, and how Jewish Americans lead universities and make life-saving medical discoveries that we all count on today. However, the significant contributions Jewish Americans have made and continue to make towards America's success are not widely known. So today's resolution highlights Jewish American inventors who created services and products that all Americans rely on each and every day. For instance, Mr. Speaker, Irving Maxson invented the slow cooker. He took inspiration from Jewish cooking traditions in Europe to allow Jewish communities to have fresh and hot meals on Shabbat. Sylvan Goldman invented the shopping cart, transforming the ease at which people are able to shop for their families. When Hedy Lamarr, the famous and accomplished actress, was not acting in films, she invented the concept of frequency hopping, which opened the door to a wide range of wireless communications technologies, including Wi-Fi, GPS, and Bluetooth. And there are a whole lot of gamers who would love that Ralph Baer invented the Brown Box, a prototype for the first multiplayer, multi-program video game system. These are just a few of the innovative contributions that American Jews brought to all of our lives. As Jews, we have a longstanding commitment to tikkun olam, a commitment to repair the world, and we take great pride regarding the impact we have made on so many generations of Americans. As we celebrate the 20th year of Jewish American Heritage Month, we've made progress towards the goals of JAM to educate Americans by celebrating Jewish contributions, which promotes understanding and reduces bigotry. So thank you to everyone on both sides of the aisle for helping shine a light on this important moment in time. And I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this resolution, and I yield back the balance of my time.
And I want to thank the gentlelady for her eloquence and lucidity in those remarks and for sponsoring this legislation, and I will reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Kansas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have no further speakers on our side, so I would reserve and be prepared to close.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Look, I want to speak very strongly in favor of Ms. Wasserman Schultz's resolution, which recognizes Jewish American Heritage Month and the important contributions that Jewish Americans have made to our country. And I want to thank her for her continuing leadership within Congress and also within the American Jewish community. The resolution calls on elected officials, faith leaders, and civil society leaders to condemn and counter all acts of anti-Semitism. And I also want to salute Mr. Schmidt, the distinguished member from Kansas, for his powerful endorsement of this idea. The resolution also goes on to urge the House to take, quote, all possible steps to ensure the safety, security, and dignity of American Jews in all aspects of their lives. So we are called upon to condemn anti-Semitism and to ensure the safety of the Jewish community along with everyone else. And the appeal is appropriate and timely. We've got to do everything in our power to counter the poison of anti-Semitism and racism and other forms of bigotry, which are really the gateway to destruction of liberal democracy in our country. But that obligation means fighting anti-Semitism even when, perhaps especially when, it's expressed and endorsed by officials of the United States government. Last week, President Trump finally withdrew the nomination of Ed Martin to serve as the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. Mr. Martin's confirmation in the Senate faced many insuperable obstacles. It was doomed. First of all, he had no prosecutorial experience and no administrative experience running a prosecutor's office. Secondly, he had shown an extraordinary devotion to the extremists who participated in the violent insurrection against the Capitol and against Congress on January 6, 2021. He represented many of them as a defense lawyer, but he championed the cause of a great number more in not just legal, but in political and civil contexts. He also failed to disclose that he had appeared more than 150 times on Russian state propaganda networks like Russia Today and Sputnik when he was nominated to be the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. And these are networks that were forced to register as foreign agents of Vladimir Putin's government. So the truth is that his nomination was doomed regardless. But I would say that all of these disqualifications by themselves pale in comparison to Mr. Martin's long and troubling relationship with a Hitler-loving neo-Nazi named Timothy Hale Kucinelli, who was sentenced to 4 years in prison for breaching the Capitol during the January 6th attack. Hale Kucinelli is an outspoken anti-Semite who proudly wears a Hitler mustache, advocates killing the disabled at birth, and he told co-workers that Hitler should have finished the job. At his sentencing, a Trump-appointed federal judge warned him that his actions and statements make everyone, including Jewish people, less safe in our country. Well, how did Ed Martin, President Trump's pick for one of the most important jobs in the American criminal justice system, react to all of the extraordinary statements and the lawless actions of Mr. Hale Kucinelli? Well, he invited him to go on his podcast multiple times to spout his fascist propaganda. He presented him with an award before a big audience. He praised him as an extraordinary man and an extraordinary leader. By attending President Trump's inauguration with his good friend, he continued to promote him in establishment political circles, and he headlined a fundraiser together with Mr. Hale Kucinelli in Florida last year. By pretending not to know that he was a vicious anti-Semite, even after he clearly had evidence that he was, Mr. Martin continued to legitimize and validate the views of this man. Mr. Martin's weak protests that he didn't know anything about what his views really were debunked not only by National Public Radio, but by the record of Martin's involvement with other extremists. For example, Mr. Martin has also praised Jack Posobiec, an anti-Semitic conspiracy theorist with links to the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, and several other white nationalist organizations. Mr. Martin frequently praises Mr. Posobiec online and calls his anti-Semitic insights valuable and incredible. Mr. Martin's own views are saturated with deranged analogies that dilute the meaning of Nazism and fascism. In one episode about the 2024 election, he compared President Joe Biden to Adolf Hitler, which either means that Biden committed genocide or that Hitler was just a regular old politician. In another episode about the election, he repeated the defamatory lie that Jewish people who vote for Democrats are somehow less Jewish than those who vote for Donald Trump. So how did President Trump treat this disturbed individual after his nomination just collapsed across the hallway in the U.S. Senate in the face of this mountain of evidence of his extremism? Not by cutting him loose, as he should have, but by appointing him to serve in a senior role in the Department of Justice, which does not require confirmation by the U.S. Senate. He named him to be the U.S. pardon attorney, and he named him to be director of a task force on the weaponization of government. A perfect assignment, perhaps, for a man who writes vituperative threat letters to Democrats when he hears them say things that he doesn't like. Well, it makes me wonder why President Trump would put up with this and would insist upon placing him in a position of such critical importance in the Department of Justice. We know President Trump saw very fine people on both sides of the anti-Semitic riot that took place in Charlottesville. We know that he had to his house Nicholas Fuentes, another neo-Nazi Holocaust revisionist. Look, I believe that this is a matter of fundamental importance that both Democrats and Republicans in the House and the Senate demand that Ed Martin not have a role in the U.S. government, given his close association with all these extremists and his very damning statements in the past, not to mention the fact that he had more than 150 appearances on Russian propaganda state networks. We should be rejecting anti-Semitism wherever it appears, on the left, on the right, in the center. It doesn't matter what you call yourself. If you align with hatred against any group, you are a danger to American constitutional democracy, and we should not allow it to gain a foothold in the government of the United States of America. So let us adhere to the spirit of President George Washington, who said in his famous letter in 1790 to the Hebrew congregation of Newport, Rhode Island, that the government of the United States gives to bigotry no sanction. Gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance. To bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance. If these words are to mean something in our day, in the 21st century, we